Wow, Dratnos, I got my Heart of Azeroth, my Azerite armor, my Warlords of Draenor legendary ring, Mop legendary cloak, Legion legendaries, tier 3 set bonuses, all of the old legendaries ready for Legion Time Walking Mythic Plus. Do you have your set up for it?
I have some terrible, terrible news, Tuttles. Unfortunately, this is not going to be the time walking like that. Blizzard has just clarified as well that Hearts of Azeroth and essences, all that stuff that worked for a little bit on PTR and these things, those aren't even going to work either. So basically, no time walking. Like if you think about building a time walking set, something that people have done for time walking weeks in the past, basically not going to work for Legion dungeons. All that stuff from earlier expansions. First off, a lot of it just doesn't work anymore, and second off, a lot of it's like lower power than the Legion stuff because it's from an earlier expansion. And then the Legion legendaries are all turned off. The BFA stuff isn't going to work. So it's basically just wear your current good gear.
Yeah, and it's interesting because whenever you're testing the stuff on the PTR, the dungeons got scaled up. So a lot of times in time walking, you're scaled down, you're doing worse damage, or you're doing lower amounts of damage and that kind of thing. But with these Legion dungeons, everything got scaled up with the mobs. And that caused a couple of things. The dungeons very much feel like they did back in Legion with just the difficulty of the bosses. But yeah, you don't have to have any weird gear sets. So they did release a developer update with a blue post. I think that the Azerite gear essences functioning in this dungeons was a bug. It should be fixed now. Let us know if you see anything unusual. That's what Dratnos just spoke about. Another very important topic is in this part right here. In their upcoming PTR build, they're going to adjust the intended to reduce the difficulty of these dungeons by approximately 3 keystone levels. While there's still work to do, we will expect that they should now feel close to the Shadowlands counterparts at any given key level. So we've done all of these dungeons, and we've tested them probably 2 or 3 times at this point. I would say
I've done each dungeon once, except for the later part of Neltharian's Lair, which I've done 0 times because the first boss is just too hard.
Okay.
Can't get to that part. Have you done more though?
Yeah, I think I've done every dungeon like 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
And the dungeons by the timer, especially okay, so we did them a lot on 15 because the dungeons by the timer, they were pretty easy to time, but whenever you had to factor in like how much damage you were taking, it felt really rough. And so this is nice from that angle where they're reducing the dungeons by approximately 3 keystone levels, but we weren't having real issues with the timer, which is something that this does solve. We were having issues getting one shot and wiping to bosses.
Yeah, that's the thing about Legion dungeons. Just the texture of these dungeons is different. You know, in Shadowlands, it's like every trash mob has something that it does, and then every boss is like reasonable and doesn't one shot you, right? And when the bosses are like too hard, they nerf them. And the way the bosses kill you is because like 3 abilities happen and you know you get worn down, right? Or they overlap and you die to that overlap. In Legion, it's kind of the other way around. Like there are a bunch of trash mobs that don't do anything, or that do like one hard hitting shoot at a ranged player or at player within range, but otherwise don't do anything. And then there are bosses that just do one shotty or very close to it levels of damage with some abilities. And they're doing some look through those sorts of abilities, but definitely expect that like just it's a different kind of experience. And the hard parts of the dungeons are going to be way harder than Shadowlands dungeons at that equivalent key level, but the easy parts will be way easier.
Is this the first boss of Vault of the Wardens
So
nerfed?
yeah, these are another set of changes. In Legion, there was this idea behind some boss mechanics that would have a special effect if they hit a tank that didn't have active mitigation up. And these are some of those abilities. They are removing that because that's not really a part of modern design. And Brewmaster doesn't really have like Brewmaster just always got shuffle rolling basically, and they're basically taking all that stuff out. So it's abilities that used to look at active mitigation are no longer going to do that.
Yeah, so like the last boss of Nelth Lair, whenever you got hit without mitigation up, you got launched like across the room.
Yeah.
They're removing that. And so that's
the verb is yeeted or yote.
Yeah, yote. You got yote. And so that's one of the things that they're looking to address. And so that's also addressed in this developer update. And so it says verbatim, we're not looking to drastically change the field of dungeons or available strategies, but we're opening to change some things to better match modern player expectations or improve the feel of the dungeons, such as active mitigation mechanics, and snapping could be a part of that. I think it's very interesting that they say snapping in particular, because whenever you did Legion dungeons, whenever they were current, snapping wasn't something that was like a common strategy. There were 2 pulls in Darkheart Thicket that you would do, that you would snap. You would snap these cats to like this mushroom or potentially this rock that you could use either one, and it was to avoid the cats from leaping on you and one-shotting you. And then towards the end of Legion, there was this found snap spot where you could snap bats into the last boss room. This is an easy way to skip some mobs, but while also pulling some easy mobs into the last boss room and get some count. I don't personally think that they should fix snapping to bring these dungeons up to speed, but I do understand why they would consider doing that. What do you think, Dratnos?
Yeah, it's not like like if you think about BFA, right? There was like a Taldazar where all the high end groups snapped 5 times or 6 times as part of the strategy, and like lower end pugs had just a very different experience there. But I agree, yeah, Legion dungeons didn't really have any of them with that sort of snap meta. I would say that the closest was that cat pull at the start of Darkheart, where there maybe half of the weekly 15s that you would find in a group finder would do that strategy and half wouldn't, and would just sacrifice their clothies a couple times and have them release at the start of the dungeon every time they leaped, because you were close to the release point anyways.
Yeah.
I don't really have a strong opinion about it either way. Yeah, it's definitely something to look out for. Another thing to be aware of when you go into Legion dungeons is the count situation is just very different. In most cases, you should look to skip every single mob that is off the beaten path and some of the mobs that are on the beaten path as well, if you can,
Yes.
because you are otherwise going to end up at like 300% count in some of these dungeons. In Shadowlands, if you pull every mob along the beaten path, you get to like 90% count, and then you just pull some stuff from the sides and you're at 100. In Legion, it's very much like you got to find some ways to actually skip stuff that's on the path and avoid pulling any of the stuff that's off the path.
Yeah, so it says we're opening to change some things to match modern player expectations and improve the feel of the dungeons. Would you change count in these dungeons?
I don't think so. I think that they should just keep it. I wouldn't hate it if they did. I don't have a super strong opinion about it, but I think that that's the kind of thing that they're going to keep, and that you're going to have to, just adapt to. The thing is, even if you overpull in a Legion dungeon, as long as you don't wipe, the timer is very lenient. So I think it's not too bad to keep it this way, but it is something to look out for. I mean, they could just increase the count required in all the dungeons and lower the difficulty of the bosses a little bit further, and that would move things towards Shadowlands, but I'm not sure it needs to move towards Shadowlands.
Yeah, I think that for me, whenever they talk about matching modern player expectations or improve the feel of the dungeon, what they should be looking at is a lot of the bosses that are one-shotting players right now. Like the last boss of Black Cold, very difficult fight. The Shadow Bolt volley that goes off and kills your party still kills your party even on a 15. And since there's no gear swapping, there is no gear swapping. That got removed. You're not able to just bolster your character up, and so that boss is very difficult. And I think that that boss needs potentially a look at. There are a lot of other bosses that have one-shotty or very difficult overlaps that you also should potentially be looking at. I think another one's like Smash Bite, that the third boss in Black Cold. Also, that guy is no joke. If you don't properly coordinate and rotate people who are soaking, and I think that is something that, like, just as a general rule, I don't think that they should change, like they said, the available strategies, including snapping or count. But I do think that they should maybe look to potentially tune down some of the bosses relative to where they were once they got scaled up. Because a lot of the trash felt okay, except for a couple of outliers like those cats. But like the bosses, by and large, felt pretty brutal.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were going into those plus 15s with like Mythic Raiders from some top end guilds as our DPS players. And Tettles also a DPS player, and you're there we doing like 10k DPS on these bosses, and they were still like, and you're having fairly defensively set up characters on plus 15. It was tyrannical, admittedly, and people were dying to not even necessarily like committing a big mistake, but more to like not having somebody like rotating a defensive and making a play on those mechanics.
Yeah, and it could be completely anecdotal since we haven't seen the dungeons in a very long time, but it did feel like it was one of those things that you got overly punished. And
that's the thing,
we get killed.
We have some experience doing those dungeons, but we also hadn't played them in 3 years. So it may be a thing of like, oh yeah, you got to practice it a little bit. But I would say, especially for everybody that's also in that position as you first are doing these, it's only going to be active for 2 weeks. You're not going to have a long time to build up muscle memory. So go into the boss fights just with a tremendous amount of respect for their mechanics. The way that Legion bosses work is they have 1 or 2 mechanics that you really need to pay attention to, and they don't have the Shadowlands style of like 5 mechanics that are all medium important.
Yeah, I would say 15s also for Legion dungeons were okay. So prior to this change, 15s from Legion dungeons were not particularly close to 15s for Shadowland dungeons. After this 3 keystone level change, it may be close. I suspect that like okay, so 15s this season are pretty easy, all things considered. I think that this is going to be like still around. You need very high coordination, is what I would say, to be able to do
Yeah,
something around a 15.
I would expect it will still feel markedly harder. But this is, as you point, I think this is a relatively easy season to do 15s. Like it's not obviously like
Yeah.
very few people do 15s and stuff, and it's high end content. But compared to some previous seasons, this season on Shadowlands is definitely more people are able to do 15s than usual, and the Legion is probably going to be much more in the opposite direction.
So aside from bosses, anything else that you would potentially change to match modern player expectations?
I don't know. I think there's stuff you could change with like the mobs that shoot people in range, and that was a big. But I think that
Oh,
all that stuff is like a big part of Legion. I don't know.
yeah. I mean that to me starts to like okay. So what he's referring to is Nelthlayer and Blackrock Hold have mobs in particular. They're archer. One is like a rock pelter, and the other one is like an archer style mob, and they have a shoot. But the shoot's range is like 35 yards, and so the most viable strategy is to have all of your range stand at 40 yards and run 1 to 0 melee and just to tank every single shot and not play any melee. And that is the best strategy for those pulls. And that could change to where the shots individually get nerfed, but then their range gets increased to where you're not able to outrange them. Same with maybe potentially even like Oakheart, where the best strategy for that boss is also just outrange every single ability. Don't worry about anything and have your tank on an island. Um, but I feel like that starts to run into the category of like you're drastically
Right.
changing the feel of the dungeons and the
That's the
available
thing is
strategies.
like those would be good balance change. Like they make those balance changes to Shards of Halkias in this expansion, right? Because those are like better
And they're current.
ways to. But that's the thing is that it's like it's better, but it's different. So how much
Yeah.
do we want to make these hashtag no changes versus how much do we want to do like making those kind of updates that we would make if they were currently active development projects? I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion either way. I think they should be fun dungeons. Whichever side of that debate they land on, I think most of those questions should be pretty minor as long as
Yeah.
they land the major things, which it looks like they're. I think the 3 keystone level tweak downwards was really appropriate because we were going in there with 250 characters and depleting plus 15s.
All right. So last thing is, if an Infernal Beacon is not activated, it will activate automatically when the a boss close to it is engaged. The main goal here is flexibility and allowing for bold strategic choices to save time, but a more clear upside is something we discuss as a possibility. I think that this is something that you and I gave direct feedback in our latest video whenever we were talking about the Infernal affix, where we talked about it specifically and we said that it's like pretty well designed for what it's trying to do, but at the same time there is no tangible reward, which is something that is fairly common for seasonal affixes these days. I don't think that it necessarily has to have a pure reward, but to be very clear to most players, this affix is almost impossible to pull with bosses. Like,
Right.
it is
We
one of
did
those
it
things.
like we tried it 6 times or something, and we pulled it off once, I think.
Yeah, and the boss was then at 80% HP, and we had no cooldowns, and you're
Yeah, it's like
like,
what have you accomplished with this, right?
yeah, and it's really hard because then there's a kick eyeball dude, and if for some reason the boss has a kick, then you can't really pull him into that. And there's like, I think that overall it doesn't have to be about pulling the infernal beacon mobs into the boss. I think that the relative difficulty in trying to do that is by itself like enough of a challenge. I think that I'm pretty okay with that. But I do think if they come up with something that is an incentive or quote upside, that would be kind of nice.
Yeah, so when we make this point, people always come out with like, oh, the affixes are supposed to make things harder. There shouldn't be an upside and stuff. But I feel like that has been the best part of the last 3 seasonal affixes has been the like when the fact that Awakened was giving you a skip and some count, and if you fought him with the last boss, you got to fight the mob with the last boss, but you get the count from it, right? I think that yeah, some like just a little drop of
You
reward
know,
for engaging with these infernal beacons rather than just like, oh hey, this is an affix that adds 3 mini bosses to the dungeon that you have to do, but don't give count or any other tangible upside, right? It's just like it doesn't have to be. You're right. It doesn't need to be there, but I do think that would make it better.
you know what? Okay, so do you have any ideas? I guess first off, because I've just come up with one that I think would not be awful.
I was thinking just some, small drop of buff, maybe like I don't know. What do
Uh,
you got?
Whenever you kill the mob, you remember the Cathedral of Eternal Night like haste bubbles that you would
Oh
stand
yeah,
in?
the hasty damagey bubble.
Dude, yeah. Okay, so it's no damagey. It's just hasty, but it's
That's just
only
a
like,
hasty bubble
but it's
where
only
the
20
boss
seconds.
dies.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Where the mob dies, and then you could just like stand in that and then be able to get, I don't know, 15% haste for 20 seconds. And then that is like difficult to play around because not all bosses you can realistically like stand in that haste bubble the whole entire time. But at the same time, it's not bad on pull. I think that's
Yeah,
kind of
that could
cool.
be cool. I could see something like that. Maybe something where like you get like a the shield you activate in Necrotic Wake that gives you a DR. If you
Yeah.
got access to something like that, that would actually be really big for some of the Legion bosses and would kind of fill that role of gear swapping to Pride as sets to deal with certain one shot mechanics. So getting access to some kind of like one use defensive extra action button after killing one of them or something. I don't know.
That'd be
I
cool.
don't have any specific requests for this. I do think it would slightly improve the affix and make it feel a little bit less like make it so that you were excited to do the infernals rather than just like, oh yeah, this is this extra time loss that I have to incur in this dungeon.
And to be clear, since it's only like a 2 week thing, I'm not like super up in
Yeah,
arms about the Infernal Beacon. Like, if
it's
we were
not
getting
it's
it,
not bad as is. It's
yeah, if
fine.
we were getting it for a full season, I think I would be a little bit more skeptical. But as it currently stands, it's like kind of okay. Like you're never. I think a lot of the times, at least in like modern dungeons, you're a lot more pressed for time, and a lot of these keys, as the timer is a lot more
Yeah.
strict. The Legion dungeon timers are very lenient. They've always been just omega free, assuming you're not having catastrophic wipes, and even
You
like
hearth out of Legion dungeons because you can't kill a boss, right? You don't hearth out because you've
true,
depleted. It's like you get to a boss and you wipe to it 4 times and you're like, I guess this is just not happening. Or
dude.
the trash packs are just farming you and you're like, all right, we're out of here. It's never a case of like you get to the last boss with like a cleanish one run and one wipe and you're like, oh, I guess we're just 5 minutes over.
Yeah, and I was watching like the Legion Dungeon finals the other day, the Legion MDI finals the other day. They three chested some key with 20 deaths. Like that, this is the kind of stuff you were doing. Both teams had 20 deaths, and you're still like one chesting it. You're still timing the key, and so it's never, you're not really pressed for time. I do think that the upside though with the Infernal affix would be kind of cool, and it would make the bosses notably easier, which is something that has been criticized by us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think difficulty of the boss fights is it's just weird. It's a different kind of difficulty. It's just numbers difficulty. Like this ability one shots you. You gotta learn it's gonna one shot you. So if you've never done Legion dungeons before, I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think you should try it out, but definitely be ready to be like perplexed by how different it is from now. Even just in 5 years, the game has changed a tremendous amount.
Yep. I think that's gonna be it for us today. Not really much else to say. Shout out all the fans. Yeah.
Yep.
We've had a lot of
Let
people
us
actually commenting on our YouTube video, dude. They've been supporting us with the comments.
Yeah, and the Wowhead comments too. Love reading through those. Sometimes not as much, but sometimes do. Definitely also, hey, anybody's watching this and you have any ideas for videos for us, topics for us to do, we are scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Please
Okay.
help us.
Yeah,
Please send us topic ideas.
Okay, so you can either DM us on Discord or you can post in the YouTube comment section. We will make sure to look at those because we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Anyways, in the meantime, we will see you guys next week, and we hope you have a good day.